Hello everyone. In this video I want to talk about how you organize your inquiry report. Truly the hardest part of this paper is getting it organized in a way that fits with the genre of inquiry reports. So I would highly recommend that before you begin organizing your own, you take a look back at some of our mentor texts. And to do that, you may want to go back to Unit 5, Session 1 and just kind of skim through some of these reports, and you'll get a sense for how it's organized, not exactly a ping pong, but sometimes things move from one point to the maybe a different perspective that seems opposite, and they kind of contradict each other a little bit. But getting into those mentor texts will really help you understand the progression of ideas in an inquiry text. And since those inquiry reports are so important to understanding different ways to organize, I want to take a look at how we organize using some of those inquiry reports. So first of all, just know that you do have some different options on how you organize. You can do a traditional outline. That's the number 1, number 2 with main points A and B and C. And there's a great YouTube video that explains how to organize in a traditional outline. You're welcome to do a graphic organizer, word concept, or map, and there's some great Google apps that might be useful for that. You're welcome to just list the key points in the sequence that would be useful for you. And I'm open to some other options too. What I want to see, though, is that you have an organizational plan that works, that gives me a clear picture of what you're doing, so you don't get so far into the paper that you then have to go back and redo it. So if it's not detailed enough, I will give you feedback saying, please go redo this, because I think you're going to struggle with the paper. It's not intended to make more work for you. In fact, it's intended to make less work for you. So just know that you have a lot of different options, but I'm looking for something that is, ready-made paper. Follow this plan, and you're there. So take a look at some of the mentor texts. One way of organizing is by teaching a point through a repetition of examples. And a really good example of this is the battle within. That was the inquiry text that you read about soldiers who are continually being redeployed in Iraq, even though they have injuries, because the military is so desperate for people who will go and fight. And if you look at the way that's organized, there's example number 1, person, here was this experience. Then there's another person, here's his experience. And another person, his experience. And they go on to say these problems aren't just confined to this one base. It goes on, it's very, very broad. These problems exist everywhere. And there's kind of a general statement that the problem is the military can't get enough people. And at that point, the author then switches and looks at the complexity of it. Why does this problem exist? Well, are they taking people who are high school graduates? Are they taking everyone who applies? And looks at why it is that the military is so understaffed. And then looks at who is actually doing something about that problem. And that's roughly the flow of ideas in this particular mentor text. In a second one, there is a technique that, it's not a formal technique, but I think you could use this. And that's the idea of giving a follow-up. And this one would be Colorado's parole system. That was the one saying that the parole system is overdue on these risk assessments, and it's supposed to be getting done, but it's not, and so people maybe aren't getting people are getting paroled who shouldn't be. And what they basically do is start with the bottom line. We were supposed to have this change 2 years ago. The requirements aren't being met. They give some evidence that proves this claim is true. That's the conclusion of all this study on this topic. They give some evidence. And then they say, well, this problem is existing despite what was supposed to happen. And they give some history, how it was that things were supposed to be changed. And then they go into the complexity of the issue. And they go point by point from one point to another on why requirements aren't being met. Why is it that these parole risk assessments aren't getting done? So another technique or way of organizing you could use. Just follow up on an event or a law or something that's supposed to be solving the problem. And figure out what's happened since that point. Another one, starting with the bottom line, stating the conclusion, talking about what the status quo is. A good one of this would be the investigating ski accidents. And that's the one where, you scroll to the top here, we find out that it is the ski patrols and the ski slopes that are actually figuring out causes of death, which normally would be handled by, say, the local law enforcement. And so the question is, who's really supposed to be doing it? That's the point that the author is trying to make. And in this report, you find out The bottom line first. The ski resorts, not law enforcement, investigate the deaths on the slope. And then they say, well, why is this a problem? And families don't get information. And they give an example of a family that didn't get information about how their son how he really died, because the ski resorts were the ones who had proprietary control of that information. Then they go and they took a look at different perspectives. Does everyone agree that this is a problem? Who does and who doesn't, and what do the people that are involved have to say about it? And they note that there were many ski slope owners that didn't want to talk about this. And so that is in itself a presentation of a perspective. And they get into some of the gray areas, some of that complexity again. Is it skiers' responsibility? Is it the ski slopes, etc.? They give a few more examples, and then at the end of the report, they state the bottom line that right now, those ski resorts are the ones who are going to investigate the deaths. Another approach to it. And then another kind of general outline type that you might use is using a frame. And by a frame, I mean that the pieces end and begin with a reference to the same outside event or the same anecdote. And there's two different pieces that might remind you of this one. So, for example, if you look at the bullies are still lurking in the school halls. This was very popular among the readers. A lot of students in our class wanted to read this for a reason. It begins with a reference to the Columbine shooting. And there's a little bit of follow-up here. A decade has passed since the Columbine shootings. What's happened? Oh, how are we doing with this bullying problem? And then if you scroll down to the very, very end, it ends basically with a reference to Columbine shootings as well. And everything in between is dealing with the complexity of the issue again, not black and white. Here's what's been done. Here's the history of it. And what are some of the issues? And they get to things like the new technologies that are developed since the time of Columbine. We didn't have as much social media at that time. And so it looks at bullying from a lot of different perspectives. It talks about students. It talks about the programs. It talks about high schoolers versus middle school and elementary kids. Similarly, this one, Not Until a Boy Died, begins with a story. It's an outside reference to this particular person who tried to get federal investigators to deal with this safety hazard. And then if you go all the way to the end, it ends with that same story. Didn't take action until after he died. So in this kind of organization, you begin and end with the same reference. This kid dying, this shooting, this anecdote happening. You tell a little bit of a story, what happened. You rely on a little bit of time, chronological order. Then you go into how the different people see the concerns, the complexity of the issues. Why is nothing changing with bullying? Why is nothing changing with these magnets? And then there's a reference back to that outside event. And the effect on the reader is to say, wait a minute, it's still the same. After all of this, no one's dealing with it. And it's a very motivational way of writing. And lastly, no matter which kind of organization you use, make sure you've covered the journalistic questions, the 5 W's and the 1 H. And you remember that inquiry is a subgenre of journalism, so think like a reporter. Have you covered who, what, when, where, why, and how? Be sure you've covered what is the issue, what is the problem or concern that motivated you to write about this in the first place. What is the status quo? When does that take place? What time period are we talking about? Where is this happening? Who is involved with this issue? And what are the different perspectives of the people who are involved with this issue? Have you covered them all? Why is the status quo the way that it is? Why haven't things changed? And finally, how are people responding to this? What attempts are being made to resolve some of the tension in this issue? Now with that, I will leave you to go write your papers and get your papers organized. But don't hesitate to ask for help. Organizing is the hardest part of it, and you may just want to talk through it, and I'm a good person to listen. So be in touch, have a great week, and write your strong outlines now.